I'll ask you here, Donald. Iar me Georgia Tierna to ná léfa a Corfún, an sin de steúrin ar gníomhre, agus náirta grasta de bhanaran paní de thuir concríca. An is grúta tos nó for arnil of ríher, agus arnil a gníomh fasta, as gur trí the creek no for read, trí Christar Dearna Amen. Direct be beseech to your Lord our actions by the holy inspirations, and carry them on by their gracious assistance. That every word and work of ours may always begin from thee, and by thee be happily ended through Christ our Lord. Amen.
I have received notice from the following senators that they propose to raise the following matters on the adjournment. Senator Lorraine Higgins to ask the Minister for the Environment, Community and Local Government to clarify the legal position on planning conditions, otherwise known as inurement clauses, imposed by local authorities, which imposes the restriction on the sale of a dwelling arising from planning approval. Senator Michael Darcy to ask the Minister for Education and Skills the usage his department intends for the temporary 16 classroom premises currently housing Cray College, Gorey, County Wexford, when they relocate in 2014 to the PPP building currently under construction. Senator Martin Conway the need for the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport to clarify the assistance to be provided to disabled persons on board buses and coaches in compliance with EU regulations number 181/2011. Senator Mark McSharry the need for the Minister of Transport, Tourism and Sport to outline the reason for the suspension of the National Roads Authority upgrade to the Castle Baldwin to Collooney section of the N4, described by the coroner as the most dangerous stretch of road in Ireland, as it is responsible for 30 fatalities, if he will reverse this decision and facilitate its upgrade forthwith. I regard the matters raised by Senators Higgins, Darcy and Conway as suitable for discussion and adjournment, and they will be taken at the conclusion of business. I regret I have had to rule out of order the matter raised by Senator McSharry, as the Minister has no official responsibility on this matter. I call on the leader.
Thank you, Henry. The order of business is items 1, 2 and 3 on the order paper. Item 1, Finance Local Property Tax Bill 2013, all stages. To be taken on the conclusion of the order of business and conclude no later than 2:45 p.m. with the contribution of group spokespersons at the debate at second stage not to exceed 8 minutes, all other senators not to exceed 4 minutes. The Minister to be given 5 minutes to reply no later than 2 p.m. Committee and remaining stages to be taken immediately thereafter. Item 2, statements on the early intervention and the economic benefits of early intervention to be taken at 3 p.m. and to conclude no later than 5 p.m. with the contribution of group spokespersons not to exceed 8 minutes, all other senators not to exceed 5 minutes. The Minister to be given 10 minutes to reply no later than 4:50 p.m. Item 3, private members' business to be taken at 5 p.m. and to conclude no later than 7 p.m.
Thank you. Before I call on the leader of the opposition, I would like to welcome to the Special Visitors Gallery Professor George Huxley, MRIA, who is a visitor from Oxford, and he has been renowned, I'm told, for his keen involvement and one of the founder members of the civil rights campaign in Northern Ireland back in the late 60s. So I hope that, I'm sure you'll all want to join me in his welcome. Yeah. So. Now call on Senator McSharry to...
Just to join with those words and to, on behalf of the Fianna Fáil group, wholeheartedly welcome the Professor. We're honoured to have him here. Leader, only that it would eat into very important time with regards to the discussion to do with the Property Tax Amendment Bill, we would be proposing a vote on the order of business today, because we think that with such a serious issue, and one that is going to impede upon the lives and wallets of every household in this country, to guillotine this issue in just 3 hours, we feel is fundamentally wrong. And I would ask you to reconsider this and make more time available for the discussion of this issue. As we know, this is a tax that is deeply unsettling for most of Ireland. It is going to be extremely unfair for the larger cities, such as Dublin, where people who paid billions effectively, collectively in stamp duty over the years are again to be penalised in this way. Indeed, those people who wish to defer the tax are going to be treated like criminals and tax defaulters, forced to pay a rate of tax or interest on that linked specifically to tax defaulters. And also, of course, the threshold at which one is entitled to defer is pitifully low and excludes most of the people throughout this country who have had mortgage difficulties. On another issue, and acknowledging Laska Hirlock, that you had to rule out of order the motion for the adjournment tonight, can I ask for a debate urgently with regard to the NRA and their cuts to 80 projects throughout the country, which are proposed to be suspended? Obviously, and indeed as Senator Comiskey rightly pointed out, some of those projects are more worthy than others, and some are critically important considering the dangers and the fatalities that have been caused over the years. Yesterday, Senator Comiskey rightly mentioned one, the N4 in Sligo, a stretch of road described by the coroner there as the most deadly stretch of road in Ireland, responsible for 30 lives in as many years, and that's now to be suspended. Apparently, under the Jobs Initiative, the government are going to handpick some of these projects at a criteria to be determined to go ahead for the creation of employment. I very much hope that we can do that by way of priority, given the seriousness of the difficulties that have been caused and the fatalities throughout the country, and that road would be included, given the fact that it is so dangerous, and that we won't have the James Riley approach to selecting projects where it's about proximity to one's cabinet colleague in terms of determining what project goes ahead. Indeed, Sligo County Council, in being told that they couldn't proceed any further with that particular N4 project, received a letter, which I understand Mayo County Council did not receive in the context of the Castlebar to Westport stretch, and we all know who lives at either end of that particular road. So we will be revisiting this, and I hope very much that when the Jobs Initiative selects those roads to be done, that the N4, the most dangerous stretch of the country, not my words, the coroner for the area, is one of those prioritised. Thank you.
Senator Batchick.
Thank you, Laska Hirlock. I'd like also to extend a welcome to Professor Huxley in the visitors' gallery. Could I also, Hirlock, call for a debate again on legislation on assisted human reproduction following the judgment of the High Court yesterday in the surrogacy case. In fact, indeed, two judgments given yesterday by Judge Henry Abbott, which we did discuss briefly on the order of business yesterday. But just to reiterate again how important it now is that we would move to legislate in this area, that it is inappropriate that families and parents would be forced to have to litigate to ensure that the rights of their children are recognised. The judgments do appear to be eminently sensible in the circumstances and in the best interests of the children concerned, and there were a number of children concerned in the cases yesterday. And I note the government's rapporteur for children, Geoffrey Shannon, has also called for legislation in this area to regulate the area and to ensure that parents and families would be aware of their rights and indeed responsibilities and of their children's rights in this area. And again, just to commend former Senator Mary Henry, who really pioneered this in the Seanad previously. Could I also, Hirlock, just call for a debate on traveller ethnicity? There's a growing momentum for legal recognition for traveller ethnicity. I note last night this was subject of a programme on prime time. Deputy Padraig McLaughlin was on that, and just to commend him for his moves in this regard to try and ensure the cross-party support for this recognition of ethnicity. And I know Deputy Aodhán Ó Ríordáin in the other House has also been very active on this, and this is something that certainly in the Labour Party we're very happy to support. And I think we can see a growing consensus on this area, and it might be worth debating it in this House in advance of legislation. we're in anticipation of legislation. And finally, Cahill, just to say that I note the UN Special Rapporteur, Margaret Sakiaga, it's been reported today that her report on Ireland is critical in a number of respects, notably the lack of legislation on abortion on the X case, but I know the government is moving to that swiftly, but also in terms of prison conditions. And just to remind the House that in the Justice Committee we'll be publishing in the next week or so a report on penal reform which will address prison conditions and overcrowding, among other things. So I would ask the Leader for the opportunity to debate that in this House once it's been published. Thank you.
Margaret. Senator Michael Mullins.
Just wish to raise a matter of health and safety this morning. It's been brought to my attention that commercial interests are promoting the sale of gypsum products for use as animal bedding in slatted units and other holding facilities. And gypsum, when washed into slurry pits, will over time break down under the anaerobic conditions pertaining in the pit, thus releasing hydrogen sulfate. And hydrogen sulfate is an extremely toxic gas. At low levels it's detected by a rotten eggs type smell and can be avoided, obviously, but at higher levels it knocks out the nasal sensors and will kill instantly. And we're all aware of the very high profile case of the Spence family in Northern Ireland that died as a result of hydrogen sulfide in a slurry pit some months ago. And I understand that the use of gypsum for the purposes of bedding is now banned in Northern Ireland and has been banned for that purpose also in England and Scotland. And it's unbelievable that it's being sold in the Republic of Ireland without any warnings of its danger. So, to prevent any further loss of life, I'm asking the Leader to bring the matter to the attention of the Minister for Agriculture, because it's unbelievable that we would allow a situation in the Republic, having seen what's happened in Northern Ireland in recent months, to pertain. So I would ask the Leader to possibly organise that the Minister would address this particular issue when he next comes to this House before we have any further loss of life.
Senator Barrett.
Margaret, can I join in our colleagues' welcome for Professor Huxley? An Englishman who, in a great tradition, believes in fairness in the way the United Kingdom treats this country. Could I raise, if I may, ask the article by Thomas Malloy in the Irish Independent yesterday that electricity prices here are the second highest in the EU after Cyprus. He estimated 40.25% above the EU average. And this is a serious cost to industries such as pharmaceuticals, food processing, and the growing computer sector. Could the Leader ask Minister Bruton, as the Minister in charge of overall national competitiveness, to address the House on the issue of the high costs of those sheltered sector services, such as the one we've mentioned, energy, accounting, legal services, because they do damage the competitiveness of Ireland internationally.
Senator Langley.
I want to raise an issue today which will be familiar to many people who served in local authorities across the country. That's the issue of the shared ownership house purchase scheme. This scheme, which was introduced about 15 years ago, allows potential purchasers of council houses to buy the house in a scheme whereby they take out a half a mortgage and they pay the rent for the other half of the house. In some cases, and in most cases, the first half of the mortgage is taken out over 30 years. They pay rent for 30 years, and then they take out the second half of the mortgage over another 30 years, and they pay rent over another 30 years. This means, that a person can be paying a mortgage for 60 years, and during all of that time, they're still a tenant to the council. I have come across the scheme in my time as a councillor with many people. I have never promoted or never encouraged anybody to take out this scheme, because effectively you're neither fish nor flesh when you're in the middle of this scheme. Today I'm calling on the Leader to bring this scheme to the attention of the Minister, to ask the Minister to review the scheme with a view to abandoning this scheme as an option for people to buy houses. The scheme is too long in its duration for people to become house owners. It creates difficulties when people pass on to the next world. If they have a will made, they're not an owner, they're not a tenant. Tenancy rights are questionable, and the ownership is certainly questionable. There's the issue of mortgage protection. It's very difficult to get mortgage protection on half a house if anybody ever tried to do it. There's also the issue of people who are locked into these schemes and who are paying extremely high interest rates because the schemes came out, as I said, about 15 years ago, who are in a very difficult situation. So what I'm asking for the leader to do is to speak to the Minister for Housing with a view to reviewing this full scheme, winding it up and entering into negotiations with the poor misfortunates around the country who are foolish enough and encouraged in some quarters to enter into this scheme, to negotiate with them to give them an option to get out of this scheme at a favourable rate for themselves. Thank you, Cahill.
Senator Cullinane.
I want to agree with Senator Mark Shoury in relation to the discussion on the family home tax or property tax. 3 hours of debate is completely insufficient. When this tax came into being, when the legislation was passed just before Christmas, there was again only 3 hours of debate. It was guillotined. I think one amendment was got to. And this is a very important piece of legislation, very draconian in some ways, in which it gives huge powers to revenue. It gives huge powers to the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Social Protection, the Department of Local Government to take money from people's grants, to take money from people's social welfare, to take money from people's wages, and even to take money from people's bank accounts. And in most cases, this tax will impact on families who, as we know, are struggling to pay bills at the moment, put food on the table, put heating oil in the tanks, send their children to third and fourth level education in primary and secondary school. And many families just don't have the money to give. Over the last number of months, I've raised a number of reports, independent reports of the political system, which have shown that more people in this state are living in poverty. We had the CSO figures of 2011. We had the Irish League of Credit Union report, which showed that the majority of working people have less than €100 a month left disposable income. And we had a report from Social Justice Ireland which showed that austerity isn't working and is leading to rising levels of deprivation, poverty and unemployment. And it's in that context that we are going to bring in a family home tax here in this state, supported, by the way, initially by Fianna Fáil with the Troika, but now they say they are opposed to it. But this family home tax, in my view, is going to put huge pressure on many families out there. And we're going to allow for 3-hour debate, rush it through the same way we did. The reason why this amendment bill has been put to us is because it was rushed through the last time and mistakes were made. And we're making exactly the same mistake again by rushing this through here today. And it's unacceptable, given the impact that that tax will have on ordinary families out there. And in my view, the reason why these pieces of legislation are being rushed through is because the government don't want to upset any of their backbenchers who might have difficulties with this tax. Let's rush it through. Let's not have proper debate. Let's not allow any kind of a campaign to take a foothold. Let's just get it through. But the reality is many families out there are deeply, deeply worried and angry about this charge and will be very angry when they hear that, again, politicians and the people that they elect are not being given proper time to scrutinise this piece of legislation.
Senator Cullenberg.
I just want to raise the issue in relation to the cost of drugs in this country in the health service. And it's following on a report, a very detailed report from Susan Mitchell in the Sunday Business Post of this week, whereby we're now paying, in some cases, 24 times the price of what the same drug is costing in the UK. And in relation to one drug which is prescribed for patients who have a psychiatric complaint, it's costing €50 for treatment in the UK for 12 months, where it's costing €1,200 here in Ireland. And the cost of drugs has gone from 572 million a year in 2000 and in the year 2000 to 1.894 billion in 2010, a 230% increase over a 10-year time period. And I know the Minister has negotiated down the price by 400 million over a 3-year time period. But my understanding is that when we're dealing with replacing generic drugs with branded products, that the generic drugs would be cheaper and certainly would be there at a competitive price. We're now finding that we're still paying, in some cases, up to 24 times more than what's being paid in the UK. In some cases, it's 10 or 11 times more than what's being paid in the UK. And I'm asking the leader to know if we can have the Minister in to have an explanation that if we are transferring to generic drugs, let's at least be paying nothing more than what's being paid in the UK. Could I just touch on one other issue, and that's in relation to, and the leader of the Labour group, Senator Patrick, raised the issue in relation to the need for legislation on the surrogacy issue. You know, we're now allowing the judiciary to become the legislators because we're not reacting fast enough. 2 weeks ago, I published the draft bill on missing persons, and I'm asking that the leader would check with the Department of Justice and the Minister for Justice to know whether or not we could start off that process of debating that bill in this House rather than waiting. There's a Law Reform Commission report published. It's a very detailed report. It's 160 pages long, and the evidence is there. Let's not wait around and park that report for another 3 or 4 years while we wait for a government department to produce a bill. I'm saying the bill is drafted, it's published, let's get on and debate it, and if the department want to amend it, let them amend it, but let's not park it for 3 or 4 years.
Your point is well made, Senator Pascal-Mooney.
I just want to bring to the attention of the House a disturbing article which has been written by the distinguished journalist with Sky News Television, Tim Marshall. This is in relation to the treatment of Palestinians in Palestinian jails, and it arises out of the death in circumstances which are being contested of Arafat Jaradat, a Palestinian in an Israeli prison. I understand that the results of the post-mortem will be made public next week, and the Israelis say that they may allow international observers access to the documentation. As a result of the tragic death of Arafat Jaradat, there was an outpouring of anger with demonstrations in the West Bank and a symbolic one-day hunger strike by 3,000 Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. I want to contrast that with what is happening to Palestinians in Palestinian jails, in which there is no protest, and which there is no international comment being made whatsoever. Mr Marshall refers to Palestinians saying that they're well aware that few people will stand up for them if they are taken into the police stations and prisons run by the Palestinian authorities in either Gaza or the West Bank. They know that torture in these establishments is routine and that deaths in custody occur there as well. This is backed up by the Independent Commission for Human Rights, the official ombudsman for Palestine, who has documented the hundreds of illegal detentions and beatings administered by a Palestinian police force in the West Bank, which is both funded and trained by the European Union. Between January 2009 and July 2012, the Ombudsman received 584 complaints of torture and inhuman treatment in the West Bank alone. Despite the volume of complaints, Human Rights Watch says it cannot find a single case in which a Palestinian official has been punished for serious abuse. And it's stated as well in Mr Marshall's article that the Palestinian authorities are said to use the Shaba as a routine method of torture, where the detainee is forced into excruciatingly painful stress positions for prolonged periods. Now, I raise this in this House simply because there has been an ongoing critique, and rightly so in a lot of cases, about the Israelis' treatment of Palestinians. But we've never ever heard the other side of the story, Laska Hirla. We've never heard about what Mr Marshall has now uncovered and has brought forth. And I would ask that the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Taoiseach Eamon Gilmore, who is also President of the European Union in that capacity, that he would raise this matter. And I'm asking the Leader to convey to the Taoiseach the very serious questions that have now been arisen as a result of Tim Marshall's report, and that he would come into this House and that he would make a statement on the matter, or that at the very least that you, Leader, would convey what I am putting on the record here today, and that I would get a response from him through you.
Very good. Senator Hart.
Thank you, Keir. Look, maybe I suggest to Senator McSherry that he telephones up Patrick Flynn asking for some advice on the roads in Sligo, that maybe he could give you some useful information, because he made a fair fist of it in Mayo himself, to the expense of counties like Donegal at the time when Mayo was getting millions on roads that were going nowhere, and counties like Donegal were getting potholes filled occasionally. So I would advise you to make that phone call. I would like Carol to ask for a debate on an issue that raised at the British Irish Parliamentary Association in Donegal the weekend about the dumping of chemical waste off the coast of Donegal, which happened in the 1950s. and was admitted to by the British government in the 1990s. And I've read over some of the Dell reports and Shannon reports on that in the 90s, where the questions were asked by both houses, by members, but answers never really came from the British government on what chemicals were dumped off the Donegal coast and what will happen if they start to decompose. So I'd ask, Leader, that we ask the Minister for the Environment, whatever responsibility it is, to come into the House and give the people, there's a lot of people in the northwest coast that are concerned and again concerned about the potential effects of these chemicals into the future. But there hasn't been any satisfactory explanation of what was actually dumped there and what the potential disaster would happen could be. The only thing that has been admitted to is that there was dumping took place. So I would ask for that debate to be to bring the Minister in to discuss it. Thank you.
Senator Norris.
Thank you very much, Last Gaelic. I'm sure, like many people, both inside this House and outside, I was not surprised but was saddened to learn of the death of President Hugo Chavez. He was a very remarkable man. He was on the side of the people, and he was also a victim of an attempted coup sponsored by the CIA, which was dramatically recorded by an Irish television group who, with great courage, recorded the events, which subsequently became a documentary called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. I think we might also note the death of Mrs. Ryan, who was one of the first people to use the Constitution in the fluoride case, which we discussed in this House. But principally, I want to say to our very distinguished guest, Professor Huxley, that I'm sure he'll be concerned as a Democrat that the Taoiseach of this country, Enda Kenny TD, intends to abolish this House, if he can possibly manage it, in an attack on democracy. And this is what it is. This is one of the two principal branches of democracy in the Oireachtas. And to lob it off without any proper discussion, without referring to the Constitutional Convention, even though it's the most serious constitutional change in my lifetime, shows a contempt for democracy that is quite astonishing. And I'd point to the precedent of Robert Mugabe, who immediately on seizing power in Zimbabwe, the first thing he did was to abolish the Senate there. And even today, we find that we are in a situation where we are being deliberately prevented from exercising our proper function in adequately discussing legislation, because the property tax bill, which is an extremely controversial measure, is going to be guillotined, as it was in the other House. George Washington suggested that, as I read in the paper today, that the upper house in America was the saucer into which legislation could be poured to be cooled. And yet again, we see the government vitiating this process. Now, finally, I'd like to say this. I believe we're going to have a very interesting bill presented this evening in private members' time. I've read it. I find a lot to agree with in it. I'm surprised that our remunerations, if you set at 24,000, seems a little low, frankly, unless you have a second occupation of a very good kind, which I don't. But I noticed in the Irish Times today there's an academic writing about it, and he wants us at 10,000, about half the minimum wage, and to have all our secretarial support removed. I mean, I just wonder how out of touch academic life is. It was pretty out of touch when I was in Trinity, but it seems to have gone right off the Richter scale. And my final warning will be this. These kind of soda runs are great. There's another one or two coming from over there, these bills. But let's get united. Because if we don't meet together, if we don't get ourselves singing from the same hymn sheet, we will be done in. If we're not prepared to make our case, and I'll tell you one thing, I guarantee you that unless somebody somewhere is listening to this, that distinguished gallery, which is also the press gallery, and look at the number of press that are in it now. Professor Huxley reigns in solitary glory there, not a single member of the press.
Senator,
so how can the Irish people know about it? I predict confidently that unless somebody's heard these remarks, there'll be nobody, as usual, to record what is said.
Senator, you're exceeding your quota of time by far. Senator Martin Conway.
And I too would like to support calls by Senator Mullins for the banning of hydrogen sulfide gas in septic tanks and the sale of it in this country. It's been banned in the north and it's been banned in a number of other countries. We've seen already the devastating consequences of this gas, and it's pretty clear that there's plenty of alternatives out there that are less dangerous. So I am asking the leader to call on the Minister for Justice as a matter of urgency to ban this gas, and if legislation is required, well, so be it. I'm sure we'd facilitate that. I'd also, like to welcome the decision this morning by Bord Pleanála to grant planning permission to Clare County Council for the construction of a pier in Doolin. This is a long-going saga. Clare County Council originally granted it through the Part 8 process and then embarked on an extra period of public consultation because of objections that some surfers had to the construction of a pier. And then it went to Bord Pleanála, who conducted oral hearings. And I'm glad that, subject to conditions, that this facility has been granted, because it means the elimination of transshipment from Doolin to boats to bring people to the Aran Islands, which was a serious health and safety issue. It means that there'll be far more frequent services, both winter and summer, and weather dependent, which it was before, will now be a thing of the past. And it means that there'll be connectivity between Doolin and the Aran Islands, winter and summer, and it will not be weather permitting. It's going to create jobs at Coherlock. It's going to create jobs at Coherlock in the short term in construction, but much more importantly, it's going to create long-term sustainable jobs, both winter and summer, in the tourism industry in North Clare, which is going to have a huge benefit to the entire county of Clare. I'd like to welcome the decision, and I call on the Minister as quickly as possible to make the money available to proceed to construction.
Senator Mark Daly.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'd like to move an amendment to the order of business that item 10 be taken before item 1. Item 10 being that Shannon endorses the protocol governing
25, is it?
the national flag.
Item 25, motion 10, just to be.
Item 25, motion 10, adopting the protocol that Shannon would endorse the protocol governing the national flag. In the House today, we're lucky to have the great-grandson of Brigadier General Thomas Francis Marr, the man who created the Irish flag. And as we all know, on the way leading up to the Senate is the flag of the Irish Brigade, which was presented to this House by John F. Kennedy when he spoke in the Dáil in 1963. And he spoke about the man who created the Irish flag, Brigadier General Francis Marr. Marr, obviously a man from Waterford, like the leader, a truly extraordinary man, came back from France in 1848 with two good ideas. One was a flag, and he borrowed the design of the French flag to create the Irish flag. The second good idea was revolution, which didn't work out so well. He was involved in the battle in Ballingarry and was put on trial for high treason in Clonmel. When the judge asked him before passing sentence, "Mr. Marr, have you anything to say?" Marr replied, "Your Honour, if you do not sentence me to death, I will try again." He was sentenced to death, but it was commuted to transportation for life to Australia. When he was in Richmond Prison, which is just half a mile away from us here, he wrote a famous letter in which he said, "Never was there a country so downcast, so pitiful, so spiritless. Yet I cannot but hope for her regeneration. Nations do not die in a day. They encompass centuries. Their vitality is inextinguishable." Pardon?
Did he say it yesterday? It applies
Senator
today.
It is timeless and universal, Senator.
Conclude without any interruption from a man who exceeded his quota by a substantial amount.
Senator Norris's contributions. He was sent to Van Diemen's Land, from which he escaped, and he arrived in America in the 1850s, and he led the Irish Brigade in some of the biggest battles in the American Civil War, most notably the Battle of Fredericksburg, which John F. Kennedy referred to in his address to the Dáil. The highest compliment, I think, that could have been paid to Marr and his brigade was Robert E. Lee, the commander of the Confederate forces, wrote in his journal that evening of the Irish Brigade, he said, "Never were men so noble. They ennobled their race by their splendid gallantry on that desperate occasion. They lost
850 men out of 1,200. Marr became the first governor of the state of Montana, and befitting a man who had an extraordinary life, he had an extraordinary death. He was on a paddle boat on the Missouri River one evening, and the following day he was gone, never to be seen again. I thank the leader for his assistance in this motion today, and welcome Brigadier General Thomas Francis Marr's great-great-grandson to this House. Thank you for your
Margaret Senator Kelly.
Chairman, I want to support my colleague Senator Dennis Landy in his call to have the shared ownership scheme operated by the local authorities scrapped. And the reason being that when it was introduced maybe 15 years ago, the people that availed of it were working, and they got mortgages based on the fact that they were in employment. Now, I know many at the moment that are now out of work, they're on social welfare, they are not in a position to repay their mortgage and the rental part of the shared ownership scheme. And as a result, in most cases, the county councils are parking the rental part of the scheme until things change for the owners of these properties. Now, I have estimated, and I've made a submission to the Minister for Housing on this, I have estimated on one case in my own area where the mortgage that was acquired 15 years ago was 35,000. When that is repaid in 10 years' time, the council will be owed 30,000 by way of rental income that was foregone for the period of the difficulties that these people were enduring. So it's going to be, the situation is, Alaska Hairlock, that they're not going to be in a position to repay that 30,000. They're not going to be in a position to go to any Linden institution on social welfare to get that money. So I think the council should scrap it and just allow these people to live in those homes and forego the amount that they may be due. And just finally on that issue, and we'll be talking about it later on today, on the property tax, it begs the question, how much do these people owe in a property tax if the council own half the house? Has that been dealt with? And I suppose maybe we'll get clarity later today on it.
Margaret Senator Pat O'Neill.
Alaska Hairlock, I'd like to ask the leader to invite the Minister for Agriculture to this House so that we could have a debate on the CAP negotiations. I feel that this country in the next 3 weeks is actually going to define, I suppose, what the future of agriculture is for the next 7 years. And we face this every 7 years. But I think it's important that we get on the record of the House each party's position. We've seen the Minister's position in relation to the CAP negotiations, but we're getting mixed messages from the opposition in relation to Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin in relation to the direction they want the CAP negotiations to go. So I think it would be important to have a debate here so that each party could put on the record of the House their position. Also, some of the farm organisations are actually divided in relation to the way this CAP negotiations should proceed. So that's why I would ask the leader maybe to have a debate within the next 3 weeks with the Minister for Agriculture here in relation to the CAP negotiations, because I believe on the 18th and 19th of March, when the Council of Ministers meet here in Dublin, it's going to be a very, very important day for this country, because we will define the future of agriculture, one of the industries that has actually helped to save our economy at present. It's an industry where we seem to have a bright future, despite, we say, threats from, I would say, racketeerism and things like that in relation to the way horse meat had got into the industry. But agriculture is the one thing that has helped to save this economy. I think it's important that we have a debate on the CAP, because CAP is going to define the future of agriculture.
Senator Quinn.
Alaska Hairlock, I'd like to see that we would have a debate on energy once again. The last time we talked on energy, and we attempted to bring up the question of nuclear energy, we were clearly up against a debate which said the disposal of nuclear fuel, the spent fuel, is a huge danger, a huge problem. There's been a development in recent times which means they've found a solution to that now. And I believe on that basis it would be time to have another debate on nuclear, because we have the history in this state of importing a huge amount of our energy, and we are compared to almost any other country in Europe, we import far more of our energy from abroad. The cost of it means that we're in the hands of other states. The other item which I'm pleased to say, at a debate here in recent times, I brought up the question of tourism, particularly Chinese tourism, and the opportunity of bringing Chinese people here. Now, since then, I'm delighted to see that the number of Chinese tour operators who had planned and are bringing in quite a number of wealthy Chinese tourists to Britain are now including Ireland in their scheme. And I was delighted to see that Brown Thomas, as one, has now taken on 20 Mandarin speakers to be able to speak Chinese to the Chinese tourists, and the signs going into not just Brown Thomas here on Grafton Street, but in their other stores around the country as well. It's a real reminder that individually we can do things. We don't have to look on the state to do it. We don't have to look on the government to do it. But individually, companies can say, we can do something about this. We can manage to achieve a great deal on that basis. So I believe there is a future for having a tourist opportunity that is much wider than we would otherwise have done. And I just say in regard to what Senator Mark Daly said when he referred to Thomas Francis Marr, and his great-grandson is now just entered into the building, into our chamber here, and I know that we'd all like to welcome him and his fiancée here today, and his friends from Waterford as well.
Senator Susan O'Keefe.
Thank you, Leske Hirlock. Leader, I'm here again asking for the Minister for Agriculture to come into the House to talk about horsemeat. The issue has been with us now for some weeks, and we haven't seen the Minister. Now, I appreciate that he's busy and that the CAP negotiations are, as Senator O'Neill has already pointed out, exceptionally important. However, there are any number of questions now arising from the horsemeat issue, not least the fact that, a couple of weeks ago there's a public dispute in the newspapers between the Secretary of State in the UK and our own Minister as to who said what to whom about how the testing was commenced in Ireland and whether the horsemeat was found as a consequence of a tip-off or whether it occurred as a result of an intuitive response to what was happening to the enormous slaughtering of meat. There are also questions to be raised as to whether the Food Standards Authority of Ireland has in fact enough capacity and is doing enough testing, or whether the amount of testing that's been done is the minimum or the maximum of testing at this time. Furthermore, I'd like to know whether or not some of the employees that are still on pay at Silvercrest, whether or not that company is being sold on, sold off, whether those employees were shipped in from Northern Ireland or from Eastern Europe, or where indeed do those employees come from. And last but not least, we had a spotlight programme last night suggesting that the relevant department in the UK had written to the Department of Agriculture in relation to a tip-off it received about a company in Offaly last year, and yet the Department of Agriculture seems not to know about this tip-off and said that it had not received anything, and yet the department in the UK said very specifically that it had sent it to the officials here. So, Leader, there are any number of questions, not least about the operation of the Department of Agriculture, but also in relation to the horsemeat itself. So I would urge that the Minister for Agriculture come to the House and offer reassurance, as Senator O'Neill and others, and indeed myself, have said on previous occasions. It is an extraordinarily important industry in Ireland, and the only way in which this industry can continue to be important and to build upon is if it's clean and if it offers the best meat and the best products, not only here but across Europe. And the only way to do that is to clean it up. And I would like some reassurances from the Minister and from his officials that such a clean-up is in operation, and that people who have been defrauding the system will be caught, be arrested and will stand trial, and at the very least that the horsemeat saga come to some conclusion, because at this point it is doing some damage to our industry, and it's a damage we can ill afford.
Margaret, Senator Laura Marco.
Margaret, Alaska here. I'd like to second Senator Mark Daly's motion this morning, and I would like to compliment Senator Daly and also the Leader of the House for putting this motion before us. In fact, it's quite surprising that there isn't an accepted protocol for the national flag. We do have guidelines, and indeed we all had those guidelines from the time that we were in school. We knew when we could fly the flag, when we couldn't fly the flag, etc. And it was observed, I have to say, and observed very keenly. And even today, in the midst of cynicism and maybe even anger, there's still great respect for that flag, whether it's in civic occasions or whether it's out in sporting events or whatever the case may be. And there is a sense of history here in the House this morning that we have the grandson of Thomas Francis Marr, who was one of the iconic figures, I have to say, of Irish history. And coming from Tipperary, and particularly if I refer to it as it's referred historically, the Battle of the cabbage patch in Ballingarry. It was much more than that, obviously, but that's the way it was referred to. But there is a sense of history this morning, and I do hope that the leader will agree to look at the order of business and to allow for what the motion suggests. I would also like to support Senator Landy and Senator Kelly on their comments regarding the purchase schemes or shared purchase for local authority tenants. I understood always with purchase schemes, and particularly the one that preceded the one that's being discussed this morning here, that the concept was, I suppose, threefold really. First of all, it gave a sense of ownership to the tenant. There was also the question of ensuring the upkeep of the house. And thirdly, there was a feeling that the rent which you paid was not dead money. Now, there's no doubt about the present scheme. There are anomalies in that. It must be exceptionally frustrating for people who bought into that scheme, because they're actually in a no man or a no woman's land. It's as simply as that. And I do hope that the leader, amidst all the other major issues which come up here, might give specific focus to that one. The fact that it hasn't raised its head too high at the moment doesn't mean that there's huge suffering on the ground. And it would be very helpful, Leader, if you could give priority to that particular one, because I believe that any minister, and there are good ministers there, that any minister would listen very carefully to the detail of what we are putting forward in the House this morning. And I compliment Senator Landy for bringing it here, because by ignoring these issues, we're adding to the anger and the cynicism and the frustration which is there anyway as a result of the recession. You know, people of no property very often get ignored, but people of half property, which comes with the shared ownership, are nearly in a worse position than that.
Margaret, Senator Kochkeen.
Me? Oh, thank you. Thank you. I want to raise today an issue that I raised on the 31st of January 2012, and it is in connection with the landmark ruling that was made in the courts yesterday on assisted human reproduction. In January 2012, I asked that the Commission on Assisted Human Reproduction report asked where it was at. That was an eminent report under the chairperson of Professor Derval Donnelly, and that had 35 recommendations on assisted human reproduction. Now, we have seen again where the legislator has superseded the legislators, and the judiciary are have taken a decision that now the Oireachtas will have to look at. It is a very serious decision that was taken yesterday on assisted human reproduction, and legislators will have now to catch up with the judiciary. There is a report there on Commission Assisted Human Reproduction. As I said, it is nearly 10 years old there now. I'm asking that this report, that has the 35 recommendations in it, be discussed in this chamber, number one. Also that the Minister come in and make a statement and to say where we're at, because obviously the genetic parents in the case yesterday won their case to have the biological mother recognised as the mother when the Chief Registrar refused to record her name on the birth cert. And what we always had understood as mater certis semper est, motherhood is always certain. We have seen where science has taken over, and we as legislators now, as it stands, it is not fair to have people in clinics and everything else self-regulating, and there has to be legislation to ensure. Now, we've seen in every sphere that self-regulatory systems are not acceptable, and this is an area where it is a serious area that has to be looked at, and I would ask the leader to, if he would ask the report to be discussed in this chamber and to make a statement and ask the Minister to come in.
Senator Crown.
I would just like to echo Senator Keene's comments. One of the saddest things that I deal with in my day job, other than the obvious health consequences of cancer in terms of mortality and morbidity, is the possibility of premature infertility. I've seen over the years a large number of patients because they were diagnosed with curable cancers that required treatments which would compromise their fertility before they had had children or during their reproductive years, had the opportunity for parenthood taken from them. In this awful trade-off that some people have to make, this awful decision they have to make about will you take a treatment that might cure you, even though it means that you may be left with this problem. And I'd have to say that one of the little triumphs that we live for is when we do see people who have had that news come back to us later with children. Often children that have been born as a result of reproductive assisted technologies of various kinds. I don't need to go into them here in the chamber, but also as a result sometimes of technologies which involve one or other of the forms of surrogacy. And I must say that I've seen so many families where they're confronted with the prospect of possible early death and likely infertility, who come back 3 or 4 years later, if they've been lucky enough to be cured and have children, and you think this is what makes it all worthwhile. And I think our state should put no impediments whatsoever in the way of as many people as possible achieving that happy outcome, not only as a result of infertility from cancer treatment, but for infertility for other reasons. And for that, I'm just echoing the comments which have been made. The National Infertility Support and Information Service have called for legal clarity and legislation to regulate this sector. This is consistent with the recommendations made as long ago as 2005 by the Commission on Assisted Human Reproduction. And yesterday, Jeffrey Shannon, the child rapporteur, referred to the current situation where individual parents are going to the higher courts as a failure of the Oireachtas. So let's not have any more failures of the Oireachtas. I do think it really is incumbent on the government and on the minister to introduce legislation and regulation expeditiously. And just in passing and follow up on what Senator Norris has said, yes, this afternoon we will have an opportunity collectively as a body, I believe, to make sure that there isn't one more failure of the Oireachtas, which has been the failure of this House to seriously countenance the need for reform. And that opportunity will be presented vigorously and definitively to the members of the House this afternoon for their decision today regarding the possibility.
Senator Brennan.